Hey everyone, I haven't made a data viz critique video in quite a while. I've been meaning to do it. I've got a list of them I want to do. Just haven't been able to carve out the time with finishing a book and work and kids and hockey is going on. So there's a lot of going on right now. But I felt inspired to do a viz critique of this connected scatter plot that you see on the screen in front of you, because this tweet from last night really echoes a lot of complaints about this particular graph. And I really think the critique is unfair. So the tweet from this Twitter feed was, "This is terrible data viz, right? There's got to be a better way to graph this." And this is on top of a tweet from a few weeks ago that I found via Graph Crimes. Graph Crimes is this Twitter feed that critiques data visualizations, oftentimes tongue-in-cheek, but oftentimes I find just kind of mean, a little bit of a drive-by hit on a visualization, and I don't think is fair. Now, you'll notice that the original tweet has been deleted by the tweet author. I don't know why, but I'll just describe. It was basically saying this is a terrible graph and just a screenshot of the graph. And you'll notice here and in the previous one, there isn't a direct link posted to the original article. I'm just going to go back here. If you go into the original tweet that was retweeted, you go down another one, and there's a link to the actual Washington Post article, because this was created by Philip Bump at the Washington Post. But the original tweet doesn't have that. And I think one thing we need to keep in mind is that graphs out of context are just like taking words out of context. And the key thing to note here about this particular graph is that in context, the author, Philip Bump at the Post, actually describes how to read the graph. So I want to show that to you right here. So here's the article from Philip Bump. This is October 18, just a few weeks ago. I'm going to scroll down here. I just want to show you the key part about this particular article. So one way, he writes here, we can visualize the relationship between two sets of data is to compare them directly on a chart. After all, if two numbers move in concert, they can be depicted literally moving in concert. One goes up, the other either moves up or down consistently, that sort of thing. So if we plot one set of numbers on the vertical axis and another on the horizontal axis, or correlation will be revealed. So then he actually describes it. Imagine the black line is being drawn from the dot at the bottom center down here to the arrow where it says 3-week shift right here. That's the weekly cost of gas and Biden's approval 3 weeks later. So we go from here to here. The line goes up and to the left over here. As gas prices rise, we go from the bottom of the graph to the top, and Biden's approval falls. We go from right to left. And then we move right and down because prices fall and Biden's approval goes up. So he does that here, and he does it again down here, and he shows another graph. And again, there are all these Twitter comments about this is a terrible graph on its own. On its own, maybe it's a terrible graph. I wouldn't say it is a terrible graph, but it's got to take you maybe a few seconds, as I thought this was a great response, that it might take you just 20 seconds or maybe a minute to understand this graph. But surely taking the graph out of its context, if you've never seen a graph like this before, again, if you've never seen a graph like this before, I've seen plenty of these graphs and I knew how to read it, but if you don't, it's described, he tells you exactly how to read it right here. So again, taking these graphs out of context means that we're not going to be able to understand it. Now, do I think it's perfect? Do I think this graph is perfect? No. I think maybe he could have added some more annotation. So I want to show you an example. So here's the graph as it was in the original post. So now what if Philip had added just a little bit more annotation for those readers who've never seen a graph like this before? So I've added a little arrow. I'm doing all this in PowerPoint. I'm just messing around here. A little arrow here, a little arrow here. I've added the label for June. And here I say, as this arrow goes, up and to the left, as he wrote in the article, right? It's not in the graph, but it's in the article. Approval drops, prices rise. And then down here, approval rises and prices drop. So now that you know how to read a connected scatter plot, maybe you were in that camp that you think this graph, the original graph, was terrible, but and you don't think it was immediately recognizable, which again, I don't think necessarily it needs to be part of our data viz toolkit. But now you understand how to read the graph. So let me show you another one. This is known as the beverage curve. Economists have used this graph for a long time, but let me explain it to you. We've got the relationship between the job vacancy rate, which is plotted on the vertical axis, and the unemployment rate, which is plotted on the horizontal axis. So during the Great Recession between December 07 and June 09, the job vacancy rate declines as we go from kind of the middle of the graph to the bottom of the graph, and the unemployment rate increases as we go from the left side of the graph to the right side of the graph. And then in the next few years, from June 09 to August of 2015, we see the unemployment rate declines as we go from the right side of the graph to the left side of the graph, and the job vacancy rate increase as we go from the bottom of the graph to the top of the graph. So now you understand how to read this. Let's take one more. This is a fairly famous one from Hannah Fairfield, and I'm sorry that I couldn't quite get a really high resolution version of this, but I'm just going to describe it to you because on the vertical axis, Hannah plots the auto fatalities per 100,000 people in the United States over time. And on the horizontal axis, she plots vehicle miles driven per capita. And so this graph starts in 1950. This first dot is 1950 here. And then by 1960, which is down here, fatalities have fallen and vehicle miles driven per capita has increased. Now by 1970 over here, we're still driving more. We keep moving to the right on this graph, but fatalities have really increased. Now by 1980, deaths have fallen. Driving has still increased. By 1990, I have to look, is right over here, miles still driven, deaths continue to fall. By 2000, deaths continue to fall. We're still driving more. And by 2011, we're driving about the same as we were in the late 90s, but deaths have still fallen considerably. And this is perhaps one of the first popular versions of the connected scatterplot, at least as far as I know, in the New York Times. But again, a graph on its own is out of context, especially in this case when the author actually explains to readers how to read this graph. I don't think it's always the case that graphs need to tell a story or make a point without the context, without the words inside it or around it. So I hope the next time you see a graph where you're a little bit confused, you might not understand how to read it, maybe it's something you haven't seen before, click on the link, go to the original article and see if the author actually explains how to read the graph, rather than saying, I can't understand this immediately off of this one screenshot. Take a pause, take an extra moment, and see if you can go in and explore it a little more. So I'd be curious to know what you think. I'll put links to all these Twitter feeds and the original post and my original post and a couple of other things in the notes of this, into the notes of this video. But I'd be curious what you think about this and other data visualizations. And I'll hope to make some more data viz critiques in the next few weeks, next few months. So thanks a lot for listening. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.